One thing that I've kind of noticed in TV shows these days is that a lot of what's popular is based on cookie cutter formulas. Like The Office, which sparked very successful mockumentary series like Parks and Rec, Community, or Abbott Elementary, which I haven't actually watched, but the Lego clips I've seen on TikTok are pretty funny, so, it's got that going for it. And, that's another thing. I do genuinely find these shows funny, but I also paradoxically kind of get tired of the same formula. But today I wanted to talk about a show that breaks the mold by very creatively combining aspects of romance, satire, and psychology to a degree that I don't think really lets it fit into any other category. And the name of that show is You. You is a highly celebrated, award-winning show that took Netflix users by storm when it came out in 2018. Also, just before we go any further, big spoiler warning for the key plot points of the show. I got a ton of comments on my last video of people complaining about the spoilers, even though I did put a spoiler warning. So just, if you don't want to be spoiled for the whole show, then click off the video now and see it for yourself. It's really good, and it's on Netflix. Oh, and also a trigger warning, this video will discuss killing, domestic abuse, and toxic relationships, so if you're susceptible to any of those things, I would also click off the video. And just before we start, I wanted to say a huge thank you to the support on my last video. It's almost at 40,000 views while I'm, making this script, and people seem to like it, so thanks for watching. Also, if you like the video, make sure to, subscribe and hit the bell, the drill for the algorithm and all that. And without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so the basic premise is that our main character, whose name is Joe Goldberg, is a hopeless romantic that just wants to find love in this cruel world. That is until you finish the second episode and see Joe kill his love interest, Beck's toxic ex. There are some hints that Joe isn't as nice of a guy as he seems, but this moment was still super surprising to me, and it kind of reminded me of the first episode of Invincible. And also spoiler warning for Invincible. I'll give you like 5 seconds to click off. I think that was 5 seconds. The main character, Mark, his dad kills the show's version of the Justice League, which is just like completely out of the nowhere. We're like, what's going on? What's happening? Joe dates quite a few women throughout the show, and I have to say that aside from the questionable behaviors Joe exhibits, throughout his relationships, there were always an undertone of romance that I think the directors captured really well. Before we get too much into the weeds of that, though, I wanted to start by talking about the backstory for Joe, because I think it will lay a good groundwork for what he grew up to be, and it'll help us in talking about why he does the very, very horrible things that he does. Throughout the show, we're shown glimpses here and there of Joe's childhood. Suffice it to say, it was not very pretty. The biggest canon event during his childhood is when his mom made him kill his stepdad. I say made in quotation marks because even though she didn't physically force him to do so, she did abuse his connection to her when she asked him to. The trust between parent and child is a recurring theme throughout the series, and there are some other characteristics that fall into similar patterns that we'll talk about later. Because Joe's mom made the unfortunate choice of turning her son into a killer, that habit unfortunately followed him into his adulthood. One thing that I think is kind of interesting about his psychopathic habits is, I don't know, is that how you say that? Psychopathic? Psychopathic. Anyways, his psychopathic habits is that a lot of the killing he does is actually spontaneous. This is usually because of two things. It's either a split-second decision, or it's like a highly emotional moment in which he is overcome by his dark passenger, kind of like Dexter, which is also a great show. Let me know if you want a video about Dexter. I would love to make one. Anyways, I think the reason he chooses to end lives in these moments is that it feels like he's back in that house as a kid, and the only option he has is to pull the trigger. One other thing that I think is interesting about his killing habits is that he is constantly trying to either justify his kills, or he's going back and forth on whether he wants to kill someone. The reason he needs to do this is that he needs to be able to see himself as a good person in order to not go insane with guilt or remorse. I think this also ties back to his childhood because the act he committed was morally gray. His mother was a victim of a lot of abuse from his stepdad, so to a lot of people the situation might be justified, and to be honest, I'm not really an authority to say whether it was or not, but I do think this contributed to his thinking about killing. With Beck's ex-lover, it was a similar situation. He was horrible to her. I mean, most people can see the douchebag from a mile away. And Joe's only solution to this problem wasn't to convince Beck to drop the guy, but to drag him into his murder basement and, deal with him. Some of the longest relationships Joe has in the show are with women who are equally as demented as him. I mean, it kind of makes sense. And initially when I found out that they were killers too, I was like, oh, he finally found someone that gets him. And there are moments where it seems like that's the case, but believe it or not, killers are not always the best communicators. These relationships usually start normal, neither of them knowing they're murderers, but they slowly kind of creep into toxic codependency, which is unfortunately pretty common in relationships and can be pretty toxic. For Joe's relationships, it's toxic because it lulls him into a false sense of moral security, only exaggerating his hero complex. So let's talk about some of the women Joe dates, because I think they're actually super revealing of his character, besides, that they're also cold-blooded murderers. The first woman he dates in the show is Beck, who is an aspiring writer. This relationship is interesting to me because they bond over something they both really enjoy, which is books. On a deeper level, though, Beck is someone who falls for romantic tropes very easily, and it's for that reason that they get along pretty well. I mean, aside from Joe's shenanigans, which she doesn't know about. Well, I'd say they get along. It's kind of hard to know if they get along because Joe is kind of code switching a lot, so it's hard to know what part is the real him. This kind of starts a pattern for Joe, though, in that most of his relationships start the way they would in a romance novel. Supposedly, he just met Beck one day, randomly asking for help at his bookstore, and then through questionable means, he manipulated Beck to fall for him. But through Beck's eyes, it was just a romance story like out of a book. He actually even saves her life in one instance, although he didn't manipulate her to be in the bad situation. But he was only able to save her because he was stalking her, so I still consider that part of his, evil plan. Joe actually does the same thing with his first wife, Love Quinn, which he dates after Beck. And yes, I said first wife. He actually has 2 wives in the show, and they're both killers, so, he has a type. Like with Beck, his relationship with Love Quinn starts with him stalking her and manipulating her world to be around his. Their relationship progresses, and though Joe tries his hardest, Love does find out that he's a murderer. This happens because his ex from before the series starts, whose name is Candace, follows him to his new life to try and reveal Joe's killer identity to the people who he surrounds himself with in order to save them, which, she's not entirely wrong to do that. We'll talk more about Candace later, but Love kind of defies the audience expectations in a response to finding out that Joe's a killer, because at the end of the season, she actually kills Candace. We then learn that she's also a cold-blooded killer, and she's, like Joe, been killing since she was a kid. This reveal was also quite a shock to me too, because in the season where Love and Joe start dating, her brother is actually painted as the more psychopathic one, but it turns out all the crazy things that people thought her brother did, Love was doing the entire time, like killing some people she knew as a kid. I mean, I didn't expect this twist at all. Again, I highly recommend you watch this show if you haven't. It's on Netflix, it's free, just go do it. After all of the Candace mess, Joe and Love decide to get married and move to a new spot to start a new life together. When I saw this, and I know how demented this is going to sound, I was kind of happy for the two of them because despite their nature, they were able to, find each other, and on paper they seemed like a good couple. That is, I did think that until Joe reveals that he's not complacent with his new life and starts looking at other women, like a bookkeeper in his local library. It seems to me like Joe's claim that all he wants is to settle down and grow old with someone is not true, and what he actually wants is the chase. Despite his romantic persona, he seems to be hardwired to destroy his relationships and create new lives with other women. At the end of their marriage, Joe ends up killing Love in a weirdly tender scene. I mean, she was trying to kill him too, but the show is a weird way of romanticizing this craziness, so it ended up coming off like weirdly romantic. I don't know. If you've sensed the pattern, you might be able to predict what happens next. After killing Love Quinn and framing it as a double suicide, he moves to London, where he gets a job teaching English at a school called Darcy College. In London, somehow he joins a friend of like upper class people through one of his coworkers. Lots of drama happens this season, and I'm not going to try to explain it all in this video. I'm already trying to fit a lot in this video, but Joe finds himself particularly attracted to one of the women in the group named Kate Lockwood. Kate Lockwood introduces herself as someone who's been a victim of her father, who was a ruthless tyrant in his industry. Specifically, she tells Joe a story about how one of his business decisions he made ended up killing tons of innocent people and children. This kind of feeds into one of Joe's fantasies about, saving the victim woman being the knight in shining armor. Later, it's actually revealed that Kate was the one who made the decision that ended up killing the kids, and she was playing her own fantasy of just being another victim of her father. A lot of stuff happens this season, but Kate and Joe end up getting married, and Kate takes over the dad's company. This then becomes a kind of power struggle for all of Kate's siblings to try and get the power for themselves over the company. What's interesting to me about this is that Joe's first instinct is to kill all of the siblings and get them out of the way. Meanwhile, Kate wants to actually solve things more cordially. There's a lot more nuance to how they got together and how everything happened, but that's kind of just the basic overview. Because Kate was so rich, she decided to buy Mooney's for Joe, which is the bookstore from the first season. Similarly to the first season, Joe meets his last love interest, whose name is Bronte, as he finds her breaking into the bookstore in the middle of the night. blah, blah, blah. Eventually they fall in love and Joe moves on from Kate despite still being married to her. Now, we're kind of getting into, ending territory, and I've spoiled a lot already, so I'm not going to cover the ending, but I did think that covering Joe's relationships might give some insight into his motivations. Now, one character I've actually neglected to talk about so far is Joe's son, Henry. Joe has Henry while he's married to Love Quinn, and because he has to run away after their relationship, he leaves his son behind in America with a neighbor that he thought would take care of them. After Joe returns to the US, Joe takes back Henry into his life, and Joe and Kate act as his parents. What's super interesting to me is how hard Joe tries not to rub his murderous tendencies off onto Henry. Presumably, at this point in the series, he's created all sorts of philosophical loopholes that justify his killing, but he still somehow subconsciously understands it as something he doesn't want to pass off to his next of kin. This isn't the first time we see this kind of behavior in the series either, because at the beginning of the show, he was treating another character similarly, Paco. Paco was someone whose father was very blatantly abusive to him and his mother, and I suspect that Joe took a particular liking to him because of his own similar father figure experience. I think this kind of concept applies to anyone that wants to have kids. Most of the people I've talked to at least somewhat struggle with the fear that they will traumatize their kids in the same way their parents traumatized them. I know at least I've struggled with that. And for people who happen to be in very abusive home situations as a child, I think that this is especially true. Now, despite the fact that Paco's father was horrible to him, it turns out Joe wasn't much better at all, because Paco trusted Joe in so much in a pivotal moment in the first season. Paco actually closes the door on Beck, preventing her escaping Joe's capture. Now, when I saw this, I was very sad because I'd come to appreciate Paco as a character, and I'm a sucker for a tragic story about a child, but I also thought, I hope that somewhere near the end of the story, Paco comes back up and takes down Joe or something. And while I won't spoil the ending for you guys, I will say that, say for a small cameo, Paco doesn't really come up again. If the show painted Paco as someone who was a victim of Joe's manipulation, and then he grew up and realized how wrong he was, and being at least somewhat involved in like the plot to take down Joe, I guess, would have been very satisfying, because it would be the antithesis of everything that Joe's done. Joe was traumatized as a kid, and because of that, he became a horrible person. Paco could have been traumatized as a kid, but then grew up to be the antithesis of that. I guess I'm kind of rambling at this point. I just was confused when Paco was such a pivotal person in Beck's murder and then didn't come up at all again in the show. It just was very confusing for me. It didn't really seem like he had a character arc. Okay, cool. So now I've talked about the women that Joe dates throughout the show. Let's use that as a lens to look at Joe as a character. The three most prominent women he dates are Beck, Love, and Kate. These are the ones that we covered during this video. Joe was attracted to Beck because she held similar interests. He wasn't attracted to her because of her status or anything. He really just had this imaginary relationship with her and then made it happen through whatever means he could. As we know, this worked, but as soon as they actually ended up together, Beck found a box full of murder trophies and her own underwear in Joe's apartment. As soon as that happened, the fantasy broke and Beck realized what was really happening, prompting Joe to lock her up in his basement and eventually kill her. Love was a pretty similar situation, except in a moment where the same thing would have happened, which is, her finding out that he's a killer, she decided to choose empathy and share that she was a killer as well. All was going good for them until Joe got tired of the fantasy of it and fell for another woman. With Kate, it was a very similar story. After they got together and the fantasy was over, he got with another woman. I'm sure you can probably see where I'm going with this. Joe is a slave for the chase. He sees something shiny, he wants it. He gets bored with it, he moves on to the next shiny thing. There are plenty of people in real life who do this, though most of them probably don't kill their exes. With his first girlfriend, Candace, the breakup was a little different, but followed the same formula. Candace wanted to break up with Joe, the fantasy was over, then Joe tried burying her alive too. I'm trying to say that despite the demeanor he portrays and his insane amount of cope around all of the evil deeds he commits, Joe is a fraud. He never has any intention of creating a relationship with any of the women he dates. He much prefers the chase to actual human connection, and he's a murderer, so he's just like a bad guy. Hot take, I know. I guess he has nice hair, which I'm kind of jealous of, but he's bad. Wrapping up though, here's some final thoughts from me, I guess. Overall, this show was very creatively crafted, and its unique blend of different genres lent itself to a very interesting story and watch. I highly recommend the show, and as of me writing this, it's still on Netflix, so check it out and let me know what you guys think about this video or the show in the comments. And again, if you like my content, please subscribe, hit the bell, you know the drill, and that's kind of it. All right, see ya.